Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Cara.
Vanessa, people don't talk about chronic pain with respect to kids very often.
It's
right?
true.
And I think part of it is that if you're a kid, the idea of chronicity and something lasting for years and years and years feels like it doesn't match up. It's like cognitive dissonance, right? Whereas in someone who's lived 30 or 40 or 90 years, it makes sense to use the term chronic pain because the pain has been going on for maybe it's a week, but maybe it's years. And with kids, we don't tend to use that terminology, but this conversation with Nicole Sachs has really made me rethink that framing because clearly we know, intellectually, as a pediatrician, I know there is certainly chronic pain among kids. And if we think about ongoing struggles with pain, discomfort, inflammation, all sorts of stuff, and we apply that thinking to kids, then we can also start thinking through solutions to it.
Yeah. With kids, we're actually often attuned to the fact that some of their physical discomfort, a bellyache and not wanting to go to school, a headache at the end of a hard day can be emotional. But sometimes we don't have a longer term perspective than just in the moment. And what Nicole talks about, she's a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist who's also a well-respected speaker and writer. What she helps do is draw the mind-body connection, the connection between our emotional lives, our emotional pain, maybe even, God forbid, trauma, and that relationship to our physical experience, our bodies, and our experience of physical pain. And it's really wonderful to be in conversation with her because it's given us so many ideas about how to give kids self-awareness, how to give kids emotional outlets, how to be connected to kids so that hopefully down the road, what Nicole calls the sort of reservoir of pain, the emotional reservoir that can overflow and affect our physical beings, might feel a little bit better. And they might feel more empowered to take charge of what they're feeling in their physical bodies.
And maybe they won't struggle with chronic pain in their future because they've managed what some of the triggers are or the mind-body concepts are. Maybe, frankly, if you, listener, have been struggling with your own chronic pain, some of this conversation about how we manage it in kids might really resonate with you and make you rethink how you approach your own care. As always, Vanessa and I will encourage you to see a doctor if you have concerns about your physical health. But with that, please listen to and learn from Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Cara.
We're very excited to have you here.
Hi, Nicole. I feel like this is like the beginning of like a 7th grade outing where you're like, hey.
I know. That's how I feel. I feel like the three of us are on a bus together and we're so excited because we get to download, talk about everything.
Exactly. You can use my Walkman. Okay. So, Nicole, this is a conversation we've been looking forward to for a long time because it's a topic that we actually haven't really covered on this podcast in 4 seasons. Chronic pain and tweens and teens don't necessarily go together, but they do. So stay tuned, listener, and you're about to understand why and what the connection is. But that's where we're going to go is sort of, we're going to hit your own journey as a framing to this topic of chronic pain. And by the way, your journey began when you were a teenager, so very relevant there. And we're going to land by the end of this conversation at sort of hitting on how teenagers in your life are really resonating with the messages that you write about, you podcast about, you teach. So while many of your clients and many of the people who know you are adults, and I think that will resonate with our listening audience, you also have this growing following among teens, which is super interesting. So with all that said, let's start at the beginning. Will you, Nicole, just give a quick top line summary of your journey and a little bit about your teenage years and how you began?
Yes. And when I tell this story, I often say anyone who ever mistakes mind body medicine as saying your pain is in your head has never been a 19-year-old who asks their father to carry them to the bathroom. So obviously, this is not something, and I always start there because we're going to talk about emotions. The pain is not in your head. You are not hysterical. You are not sensitive. You're not making it up, and you're not at fault, no matter how old you are. So I was 19. I was at college, and my back went out completely. I could not move. I couldn't get up off the floor. And it was about a week before final exams. And my parents had to come to college and literally pick me up and carry me home. And as any responsible parents would, I underwent all the tests, x-rays and MRIs and orthopedic surgery consults. And I have a finding called degenerative spondylolisthesis. And according to every orthopedist I've ever met, I have a really gnarly case. My vertebrae, one of my vertebrae is shattered and replaced with scar tissue. I have two that sit atop each other. One has slid forward. It looks really rough. And so when they saw it, they made the very obvious assumption that this finding was the reason for my pain. And everyone believed it. And why wouldn't they? And they said spinal fusion surgery was the standard protocol. But two things were really troubling. The first was that no one was recommending it for an otherwise healthy 19-year-old, which means at this moment there was no solution. And the second was the solution wasn't even a solution because nobody guaranteed pain cessation from a surgery. They were like, it might take your pain away, it might not. And so it was kind of just like a really rough moment. And they said, but don't worry about it. You don't need the surgery. Here's all you need to do. No more exercise, no more travel, no more riding in the car for more than an hour because the bumping motion could really destabilize your back. Very specific sleeping positions in order to keep yourself safe. And the likelihood that you'll have a biological child is slim to none because the weight of the baby on the front will really be catastrophic to your back. So just those small things.
Those little details. Okay, wait. We're going to put a pin in it. Will you flash forward and tell people like, when was the last run you did on a beach and how long was it?
I can run about 5 miles on the beach on a good day. And I have 3 children and I exercise till the day they were born.
3 kids. And did you have surgery?
I did not.
Okay. So that's what started you on your journey.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Take us to Dr. Sarno and help us understand, because this is an audience that is really committed to understanding science and biology, as well as psychology, stressors, and all of the sort of non-bench sciencey, non-medical issues that impact the body. But I think your relationship with Dr. Sarno grounds you in both. So can you share a little bit about him?
Nicole, I just credit to all the moms, all the Pebbler moms out there who are sending their kids stuff, articles, clips, Instagram posts, because your mom was pebbling before we ever had social media. Because how did she discover Dr. Sarno?
Exactly. It's great that you reminded me to say that part of the story, Vanessa. So essentially, I had this terrible prognosis and I went into deep denial. I was practicing it really well. And I just went on with my life with enough steroids and painkillers and muscle relaxers. I went from acute pain to chronic pain. So I was able to return to school with a handicap sticker on my car and start my life as a person with chronic pain. And when I was in grad school in my early 20s, my mother was watching the Rosie O'Donnell show, throwback to like the 90s, before there was any social media. There was literally, you could watch TV. And on the Rosie O'Donnell show, she did this segment called Fix Jeanette. And her producer, Jeanette Barber, was in a motorized wheelchair with such severe pain in her ankles, feet, and knees that she could no longer walk on her own. But my mom was watching the follow-up episode. So she had missed the Fix Jeanette low point. And the one my mom was watching was footage of Jeanette running the New York Marathon. And so my mom was like, what the heck is going on here? And Rosie O'Donnell said, Dr. John Sarno, mind body medicine, NYU Medical Center. Nothing about it is woo-woo or therapy talk. And in fact, Cara, when you said this is, some of our listeners are really, really talking about science and medicine, and some people are really talking about psychology and, emotions, or everybody's interested in both. This work is the bridge where all of that meets. Because what I understood after my mother's pebbling, as you say, and introducing me to Dr. Sarno was that there is a mind-body connection that we already believe. Every person out there, whether this is a teenager listening to this or a mom or a dad, when we have a really stressful day, we could get a headache. If you get terrible news, or if you see the wrong phone number pop up on your phone at midnight, your stomach goes sick. What's the most basic one? When you're moved or when you're sad, water falls out of your face. We cry. Okay. We all know that emotional stimuli cause physiological reactions. No one in the world ever denies this. But when anything becomes problematic or scary or chronic, all of our understanding of the mind-body connection goes out the window, because we are fueled by fear and urgency to be better. And then we start naturally giving away our power because we want someone to fix us. Don't we all? We are a giveaway our power to pills. We are a giveaway our power to procedures and specialists and even alternative practitioners, because I am too. I want somebody to fix me. Nobody really loves the idea that we have responsibility to help ourselves, but also with responsibility comes huge empowerment. And that's what I learned from understanding the brain science behind why I was suffering and why so many of us suffer.
Nicole, I want to dive into that because we actually spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about brain science. I mean, mostly in relationship to young people and their developing brains and brain maturation. But, our audience is familiar with the limbic system, but we don't talk a lot about the amygdala. And we do talk about stress response and its relationship to puberty, but we don't talk about stress response in relationship to pain and to survival, right? So can you talk about the role of the brain and the role of the amygdala so that people can really understand the relationship between pain and the stress response inside the brain and the body?
Yes. And, before I even say that, I want to say one thing that I think I missed at the top of the conversation, which is chronic pain is not necessarily what you think it is. And especially if you're a parent dealing with kids that have like frequent stomach aches, or they have headaches a lot and they miss school, or they just don't have the energy they should have given the number of hours of sleep they got. That's also this. Like, I want to make sure to invite as many people as possible into the tent with us.
Right. And it's important to just chime in with the pediatrician hat on for a second and say, as a healthcare provider, you can't call something chronic pain until you've ruled out things that are actually what we call acute on chronic, like things that are problems that are identifiable that are causing this long-term issue. So abdominal pain is a great example. The number of kids who see their pediatrician for abdominal pain, non-specific, is massive. The number of kids who miss school because of ongoing abdominal pain is massive. The vast majority of them, it's a manifestation, a physical manifestation of something that is going on in their social or emotional life. But there's a large group of them, it's not the majority, but it's a significant number, who have something physical going on. There is this parsing, and you keep referring to it, and it's really important to address at the top. There's the part where you go collect your data.
Yes.
And then there's the part where you acknowledge the psychological component or overlay. And then there's figuring out the balance between the two. And for every person who's listening to this podcast, it's going to be different based upon the circumstance. So, acute issues, you've got an ulcer that's caused by H. pylori that gives you acute pain. that gets treated. But the chronic ongoing abdominal pain that happens, that feels really similar, where and how can that be addressed? That falls into this chronic pain bucket.
Yes. And thank you for saying that, because what I always say, and I say quite a bit in the book, is I'm a mother of 3. I've been doing this for 22 and a half years. I love to take my kids to the doctor and hear, oh, it's strep throat, take the antibiotic. Like, I am not some witch doctor, in my kitchen, like stirring up a brew. I am the first to go to the doctor and to get checked out. But what I hear far too often in my work is, I've been to every doctor, have had every test, and one of 2 things is happening. One is it's clean. They can't find anything wrong with me and I'm still having the symptom. Or 2, I have a diagnosis, but the medical model has said, well, it's one of those things you just have to live with for the rest of your life. Do your best. We're really sorry. Right. So those are the places where we can land where I am, and I can have a really, really impactful solution for people who are willing and ready to see things maybe with a different lens, through a different lens.
Yeah. So Nicole, we've sort of set the table. We've Cara's got the sort of the medical side of it. You've acknowledged, we understand the universe. Let's dive into brain and stress response and kind of that pathway.
Yes. So, I like to usually start with a metaphor, because I think people understand this really well when they understand it as something not so granular in their own body. So I want you to picture that a house is on fire and that the house is equipped with a fire alarm. So there's a problem in the house. The house is on fire. The alarm starts going off and the alarm is screaming. The alarm is loud and it's screaming and it's got lights flashing because it needs to get our attention. There's a problem and the alarm is the indication that there is a problem. So now the fire department comes, and in our little scenario here, they take out their hoses and they start dousing the alarm. They douse the alarm, this little box on the wall, because it's so loud and it's so in their face that they're like, wow, that's the problem. But of course, the problem is the fire. And so what I help people understand when it comes to brain science is that our nervous systems are meant for short bursts of fight or flight, getting us out of acute problems, because that is the human being and that is how we have stayed a species for all of these years. However, the human nervous system is not meant for long-term fight or flight. It's meant for a predator and then a solution. But 21st century life for both teens and adults is an onslaught of predators. There is so much in the world that triggers us into these tender spaces where we feel defensive or angry or ashamed or terrified or full of grief. We have no time to worry about that stuff. That is not convenient to sit with that stuff. So naturally, we repress it. And it goes into what I like to call our reservoir of emotions, this imagined glass science beaker inside of us that gets dumped into every time, you're a kid and you don't get invited to the party that weekend, or you're a parent and your kid doesn't get invited to the party that weekend, and that heartbreak and that trigger that brings you back to when you were in 8th grade and how hard that felt. This is the human condition. No one is immune. And so this reservoir fills. When it starts bubbling over and reaching maximum capacity, what happens is it starts knocking at the door of consciousness. It starts threatening to inform us of how enraged and full of grief and full of terror and full of shame, et cetera, we are. And because the brain, and you guys know this, seeks familiarity, the brain will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar possibility. That's how we're wired. We're wired to survive. That when we are getting to that point and we're triggered into fight or flight, the brain sees pain as a protective posture. So what I'll explain is it's an easy way to explain it is this. And let's use an example for a school-aged person. You got to go to school. You have a big test. You always have felt insecure about math because math has just been your Achilles heel. You even go to your tutor and you feel even worse after your tutor because now you've got extra help and you're still not understanding it. Plus, Janie always leaves you out. And when you get to school, you know it's going to be a problem with her. And then it's going to take your mind off the math test. Okay. So all of this stuff is happening. This is not an unsafe situation, really. It's not an unsafe situation for your survival, really. But your perception of it is that it is. And that makes total sense. So your brain and your nervous system, your emotional reservoir overflows because it's not just a regular school day. It's a school day with these two factors. You go into fight or flight, and now your nervous system and your brain are scanning the landscape. How can they protect you? You need protection. A predator is afoot. The stomach ache grips you. You're sitting at breakfast and you say to your mom, I can't go to school. And you are not making it up. You are in tremendous physical pain because the brain and the nervous system have sent inflammation. They have sent muscle constriction, spasm, whatever is happening in the stomach to create this pain. So now you go lie down. We call this safe in the unsafest way because truly a life is not built on tapping out of our responsibilities. That's how we learn and grow, and we all need it. But you have no choice because the brain and the nervous system chooses for you. And so that's like just a really relatable example of why pain is considered the safer posture and why our neural pathways start wiring to put us there. And that's how chronic pain starts.
So Nicole, I love another person who uses the middle school scenarios. Come sit by me because I'm like steeped in middle school scenarios. And anyone listening is like, oh yes, I can viscerally feel that. I remember that from 7th grade. Or as a parent, I have, last week I watched my kid go through that, and it's so painful and it's so heartbreaking and it's so upsetting. And yet that's, a lot of these things are part of life, and part of life is learning how to manage them, and with wonderful mental health professionals like you and all sorts of tools and skills that we build. How do we understand what is sort of typical emotional discomfort, sort of managing setbacks, handling resilience, conflict, all of those things, versus what are the triggers that are actually impacting our, not just our mental health, but also our physical health and potentially triggering chronic pain? Like, how do we understand kind of what sits in what bucket, or is there no way to sort of safely or accurately sort of put things in categories?
I get the question, but I think truthfully, if we're going to be living in the solution, it doesn't matter. What really matters is, how do you feel today? What really matters is, are you handling life on life's terms? Are you able to thrive? Are you able to move through your day and feel like you're getting somewhere? And that's really the key question for kids or for adults, because normal stress is going to be a part of everyday life. But when you're handling it, you're handling it. But when a stop sign comes up into your face, whether it be physically or emotionally, that's when it's time to look at a solution.
So it's not universal. It's not like this group of things are going to cause, like it's subjective because each person's experience is unique and singular to them. And so what might stop one person in their tracks may be no big deal to another person. And we can't sort of like externally determine. It's really about how they end up affecting us. Is that a fair description?
Well, and it boils down to the definition of mental health, right? As we all have come to know it, which is being able to manage the things that come at you. You don't always have to be happy. It's being able to have the appropriate emotional reaction and manage it rather than the it of the thing. It's the management, right? The processing.
Right. But I want to the reason I'm asking this question, Nicole, is because a lot of what you see in your patients is stuff that happened to them when they were younger that didn't get dealt with when they were younger, and it sort of manifests as chronic pain later in life because that reservoir was left to like fester. It was left to kind of, fester inside of someone. So what I'm wondering is, and this kind of gets at this concept of dealing with these stressors when kids are younger, like dealing with them, not necessarily in the moment, but in the era in which they present themselves, rather than letting them sit and fester inside of us so that there's, decades of chronic pain. I guess so. I'm wondering, is there any way to know, or how do we address with kids those stressors when they are still kids to help the down the road, help them not have the down the road impacts on them later in life?
Yeah. So I think the best way to get started with answering this question is, we all know, if anyone has more than one child in the world, we all know that it is nature and nurture. We all know that kids are born and they are certain kind of kids. I have 3 kids that are 3 of the most different people in the way they meet the world. What my 17-year-old can handle, like it's no big deal, water off her back. My 22-year-old, we need like 3 hours to like sit and talk about it. And it is just the way they are wired. So I think we have to start answering your question by saying everything in life impacts us depending upon our ability to tolerate it, depending on our personalities and the ease with which we meet the world, depending on our skill sets. You know, a lot of kids, if they're like really good at something, like let's say you have a sport, right? And so you have a sport and you have a coach and you have someone who believes in you and then you have your team. Yeah, you know, Janie in math class, she's a pain in the ass, but who really cares, right? Because you've got your thing to go to. Whereas a kid who is maybe not so talented in sports and this is social is like everything, that's a devastation. So it's really not one subset of problems or one subset of kids. It's more about, you know, there's a mantra in social work, which is my original training. My master's is in social work, which is start where the client is at. And so when you sit down with someone, it's less about looking at their diagnosis, even though you will, but it's saying like, what brings you here? Tell me everything about what is today. And then you start there. And so I feel like that's what this is really. It's about assessing each kid's reservoir, which will be filled with different things. And so when I look at my own children, like Charlotte, my youngest, the one who, you know, really it's like she's a duck. I am so impressed by the way water falls off of this kid and the way really it doesn't, my son and my other daughter, not so much, but she is a perfectionist so beyond. And it is like so annoying to me because I was raised by an incredibly critical father. So I went the opposite. I overcorrected big time with my kids. And I'm like, everything you do is beautiful and wonderful. And she is just a maniac with herself. And she's a ballet dancer and she's, you know, a student. And so anyway, all I'm saying is, that's her biggest albatross. So we have to talk about that stuff way more than sometimes emotional experiences that aren't a big deal to her.
So I want to dig into that because I have a sense I know there's at least one perfectionist type A person sitting in this recording. And it's not me.
It's not you either, Nicole.
Yeah. And it's not you, Nicole.
It's not you.
So if anyone can do the math here, but I want to think about, and I have a perfectionist mother and a perfectionist sister who I'm not outing them. They own all of that.
Yes.
And so what I wonder about, Nicole, are the people where on the surface, right? I think about the swan, the metaphor of the swan, and on the surface, it's serene and beautiful. And underneath, the little feet are moving as quickly as they can to make it all look so good. And so sometimes I wonder about like what we're seeing in our kids, like what's manifesting on the outside versus the perfectionism or the effort it takes to make things look effortless, and sort of how do we delve without interviewing for pain? How do we sort of make space for just like some people are the way they are and some people that's just who they are and it's not going to lead to like that's just their makeup and great and they're going to move through the world and do wonderful beautiful things and that's great, but like the pitfalls, the concerns, because you talk in the book about there's a sort of type of person that you see a lot of, and that sort of type A perfectionism is something that, you know, that you worry about.
Yeah. So, you know, what I do often with kids is I explain to everyone, parents and kids, that my prescription is knowledge. It begins there. The first thing I do is I say, we don't have to identify a problem necessarily with a kid that we're dealing with. We can say, hey, guess what? This is going to sound wild, but I never really thought about it this way. And then giving the whole example of, I know stress can cause headaches, and I know like getting in a fight with your best friend can cause you to lose your appetite. You know what's so wild? Headaches and stomach aches and body pain and, you know, skin problems and all these things that we thought were only body and only medical. They're exactly the same as that. They're also really connected this way. So I don't pathologize. I actually start with the wonder and the new understanding of this is something I'm understanding now. And wow, what a better life it is when we understand that when we look at our emotional worlds and when we look at our stress and when we look at our maybe why that fight with your best friend is harder because I know when you were really bullied in third grade, that left a mark, and like, so it's not about identifying someone as a problem. Even though I know as parents, we kind of sometimes are tempted to because we want to solve. We live to solve. And so that's where it's sometimes hard and you have to pause and sort of start there,
Nicole, this whole conversation is making me think about a guest that we had recently named Carol Tavris. And she wrote a book called Mistakes Were Made, But Not by Me. And it's really a book about rewriting memory and why we do that. I mean, it's really about cognitive dissonance, but the tool to make things that are dissonant come together is that we rewrite memory. And this conversation feels like it is the physical manifestation of that theory come to life. That, Vanessa asked about what are these grounding childhood events that inform a chronic issue later in life that maybe if we can fix them or pull at least a couple key ones out of the bucket won't overflow. And your answer really fair is it's not necessarily the event. It's different for each person and it's the volume and it's the personality. It's all the things, right? But when you layer on this idea of rewriting our narrative, it makes me think about how maybe one of the things that we can do to Vanessa's question is help kids rewrite their lived experience of what is happening to them in a way that is more manageable and less stress inducing, which will then cause less of a biological impact, which will then cause, less cortisol and it will, trigger the amygdala less, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, like really, and you have a technique for this that you write about, you teach called journal speak. And I want to get into that because I think it's actually what Carol tells us we do by default inside our heads, and we have more control over it than we realize. So yes. I'm wondering, I may have just braided together things that do not belong together. And Vanessa,
I was actually very impressed with that whole sort of thesis and where you went. It was very impressive.
I'm type A,
No, but actually it was fantastic because it actually gives me something really great to say. So
go for it, Nicole. Say.
And this is the thing that I want to say. We are often resistant to that which is the most healing because it feels really hard. So what I'm going to say right now may be counterintuitive to some parents, but I'm going to promise you with 2 decades of experience plus under my belt, watching people, including teens and tweens, dramatically change, meaning going from basically being being homeschooled because they can't go to school because of illness, back and thriving and playing sports. So huge changes is this. There are pains inside of us, emotional pains. There are traumas. And what we want to do is 2 things. We want to make people feel better about them and we want to set them aside. That is just the natural human reaction to struggle. And what I'm going to say in the space of rewriting the narrative is what is incredibly healing instead is to go back calmly and with compassion to sit next to them, sit next to those really injured parts of ourselves and not only be with them, but say to them, I want to hear from you anything you want to say. I want to hear from you exactly what it was like. I am fascinated. I don't want to tell you it's going to be okay because we both know it won't. It wasn't back then and it won't be okay for that version of ourselves, but it will be so much better now if we can go back and listen. And for adults, I call this inner child work, but for kids, and I have worked with kids and it's been so fantastic. And I'm going to use the 3rd grade bullying example. So I'm working with a kid in 10th grade who's having tremendous school phobia and all sorts of problems in terms of socialization, but academics are being affected. And I know there's history of severe bullying in 3rd grade. They had moved and the child was just really, really annihilated socially. And we never want to talk about that. And all we want to do is feel better about it. And don't worry, you're so much better now. And the work that really changed the game and got this kid back to school and without these horrible stomach aches, all these gut issues, all this testing was this. We went back and I said, okay, let's picture him. Let's picture exactly what he looked like. So actually, let's write down a description. What kind of clothes did he like to wear? How did he wear his hair? What were his favorite shoes? What did he like to, play with, hold? And you really get an image. And then you sit literally, mentally with this person, with this child inside of you and say, what was it like to be you? What was it like to go to school? How did it feel on the bus? How did it feel the first second you saw that kid, that main bully? And you say, let him speak. And then we use journal speak, which is a very specific technique that I developed in my own recovery through my own darkest hour. And what journal speak is a completely unabashed, impolite, unfiltered, politically incorrect, if you will,
Vanessa is so excited.
Rant that comes from the voice of either you, because you're doing this in the current day, or in terms of this inner child work, in the voice of that kid with all the language. And there's nothing more fun with kids than telling them, use the F word. Use whatever it is you need. We are saving your own life here. We are rewriting your brain. We are freeing you from the jail of this repression. We're going to do it. And it was just, the pain pours out of what it was like. You don't have to hold it down anymore. The rage pours out of, I want to, punch you in the face and rip your eyes out and all these things. And you just let that version of you speak. And it is counterintuitive and it is freeing beyond. And then it's destroyed. So it's a 20-minute practice that is immediately destroyed. One of my favorite clients used to say, it's like blowing your nose in a tissue. You don't need to look at it again. Get rid of it. Flush it down the toilet.
So Nicole, in your book, I love the part where you talk about hating being a mother and viscerally the things that you hate about it. And anyone listening to you now would know you love your children and you love being their mother, but also you were the parent of toddlers. And frankly, I hated being a parent of toddlers too. So I really related. What I'm wondering for tweens and teens going through this process, what if it's their parents who are the source of the pain, of the self-loathing, of the bullying, right? What if that feeling of disloyalty, that discomfort, how do you help kids feel permission when it's that person they're meant to trust and love most in the world, when that's the source of what they're struggling with?
It's kind of a sophisticated topic, but I have had certainly more mature middle schoolers and definitely high schoolers get it. Okay. And so here's the way I lay it out. Life is a choice between what hurts and what hurts worse. And that sounds negative on its face, but it's actually a great relief because you stop expecting everything to be good or bad, happy or sad. It's like everything has gray. And in that, there are two choices in this situation. You live your life in your pain and discomfort, whatever it is that's bothering you, even if it's just anxiety. And I say just anxiety, not lightly. Anxiety can be crippling, or it's anxiety and physical pain, or any number of things. Or you live that same exact life, but you also, in the privacy of your journal speak, tell the truth about your parents. Tell the truth about your self-loathing. Tell the truth, because what's happening is your nervous system doesn't understand the difference between holding that in and a gun in your head. It's insane that it's true, but it is true. And so either live your life and express this stuff, knowing that you are rewriting that relationship.
Can I ask a question about that though? Sometimes when I hear you speak or when I read what you write, I feel like there are gradations along your nervous system. There are things that cause it to trigger more, and there are things that trigger it less. And then other times I feel like it's analog, like it's either on or it's off. And that's a good example of analog. Like this thing that's coming at you feels as existential as someone holding a gun up to you. Does it differ based upon the circumstance, or is it really sort of, is the threshold trigger enough that it really is an on-off? And yes, there are bigger existential threats, but in general, it's sort of an on-off, and you're just trying to get to the off switch. I mean, not by actually getting it out and not shutting it down.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Here's the best way I can describe it. It's kind of similar to my answer to Vanessa's question earlier. So I was listening to an interview recently. Demi Moore was talking about her fame, her huge fame in the 90s. And she said, the reason I was anxious constantly and had so many panic attacks is my nervous system didn't know the difference between a camera and a gun, because the paparazzi was always pursuing her. So the answer that I would give, Cara, to that question is it's really all about the reservoir. Okay. So let's say you're a celebrity and the paparazzi is always after you. On some days, when everything else is going decently well and your reservoir is, maybe a few inches below maximum capacity, they're just annoying. You know it's happening and it's like not fine with you, but you got it. When you're up to here, you see one more freaking person and you're like, and then like whatever's going to go off in terms of the alarm bell is going to go off. Same with kids. You could have a mother that is like incredibly critical and she's always on your case and she never gives you a break. But you know what? You have a boyfriend and everything's fine. And you just got an A on your math test. And like, so, oh God, she's just annoying. But on days when you're really raw and you're really up to here, she says one thing and you get a migraine so bad you have to go in your bed and shut the door and not talk to her all day, because that's the protection. So it really does come down to a switch at the end, but there's different factors that lead us there.
Nicole, I love that so much. What I'm wondering about is kids at certain ages and stages can't articulate how they feel, right? It's like, it's the mood swings, it's the hormonal looping, it's the new sensations and experiences they've never had before, right? There's all sorts of reasons why they know it doesn't feel good. And I'm not talking about even pain. I mean, sometimes it's mood and sometimes it might be pain or other physical experiences. How do we help them find language when they don't have the way to express it?
Well, the first thing I'll say, and one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Ram Dass, I don't know if you've ever studied any of his stuff, but he's just wonderful. He was a Harvard, sociologist, PhD, and then he went on his own spiritual journey. Anyway, for those who haven't heard of him, I'm a big fan of Ram Dass. And what he says about parenting is this: the only thing you ever have to do to take great care of your kids is work on yourself. And so the answer to your question for me begins with the fact that kids are kids, right? You guys know better than anyone. They're going to go through hormones and stages and puberty and changes. We've all lived it ourselves. We've parented children through it. And there's nothing to be done about certain of those things. They are going to live through the natural stages of growing and changing in human life. So for me, the best way to help them is to not react in the typical human way, because they are so frustrating, and they are so, they're going through their thing that they can't control. And then if we don't do enough work on ourselves, we can't control the adult temper tantrum that happens in response to them. So I definitely could address that also. And I do have an answer to your question, but I want to say that it is, to me, such a gift to do this work for yourself, because then you don't have to be so reactive.
Well, and it also feels like we, the adults, seem to need labels on everything for our kids. Language makes them understanding what's happening to them much simpler in many ways. But before they have the language to explain what they feel, it sounds to me like it's the feeling, like identifying the feeling first, that becomes the most important thing. Getting the language layered on top is a helpful shortcut to being able to communicate that feeling. But am I understanding that right, Nicole? And so that's where the modeling and sort of taking care of yourself first matters, because if they don't have a label for it and they've just got a feeling that they're expressing and your bucket is full as the adult, you're going to overflow very, very quickly.
Yes.
And in response, right?
Yeah, I mean, and like take my own teenager, for example. She's a sweet kid. She's a great kid. But sometimes she's like awful to me. And when she's being awful to me, if I am centered, if I've done the work on myself, I look at her and I laugh and I go, oh my God, I totally remember when my mom was this annoying. Oh my God, I totally remember when all she had to do was breathe. And I was like, could you just shut up? And then she looks at me and she's still pissed, by the way, because she's not always wooed by my skills and tactics. But it takes the air out of the balloon. I'm not taking it personally because I'm okay. I've taken care of myself, and I let her not have the shame of horribly mistreating me because she's just having a hormonal panic and like she can't help herself. So it's really about normalizing it, labeling it, as you said, Cara, but also knowing that if I don't want to be part of the problem, and that's helpful.
Yeah, my tactic, Nicole, is like, oh, you seem like you're in a really shitty mood. Do you want to braid my hair?
So wait, do the reaction, Vanessa.
And it's always like, no, I don't want to braid your hair. I actually, full disclosure, this was not in reaction to a crappy mood from a kid, but it was because I love having my hair braided. I paid my daughter the other night. I paid her $5.
So good.
To play with my hair for half an hour because I was like, well, it's cheaper than getting a massage. And also she's used up all her allowance. So I'm going to
The empty nest is going to hit you hard.
The empty nest is going to be really bad for my scalp. So Nicole, I want to help people think about how they might get started, right? They have a kid or they themselves are really struggling with chronic pain. Maybe they have a kid, a school refusal situation, or a kid who's really avoiding or opting out of things, or they themselves have been living with chronic pain and it's really getting in the way of life. Besides reading your book, which we encourage people to do, Mind Your Body, how do they begin? What's the sort of, how do they clear the pathway to begin to address what's going on?
Well, as I said, the first part of this prescription is knowledge. If you can't really center yourself in the fact that this dance between the mind and the body is happening every second of your life, it's going to be really hard to figure out how to live in the solution. So that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book as the aggregate of best practices of 20 years of like, this is exactly how to understand it. And this is exactly how to explain it. So it's just a really fantastic place to start because it's all in one. You can hold it when you're in one hand. If you're a person who likes to listen, I'll read it to you on Audible. So you can. I'll be nice enough to do that for you. So you can do that. Another thing to remember, and this is something that I have tremendous empathy for, and I know you guys do too. It is terrifying when your kid is sick. Mm-hmm. It is terrifying when your kid won't go to school, and it is enraging. And it is a full panic and you could be full of shame because why can't I solve this? A lot of big feelings come up. And so what we want to do is we want to solve for it. And what our kid feels from us is panic, shame, and rage. They might be smart enough to know it's not at them, but they still are living in this environment of like, this is a 5-alarm fire. This is a very big problem. And the only mirror I have in life, my mother, my parent, is looking back at me. And all I see is this is a panic and a problem. So the first thing I would say is the best thing you can do for a child who is really suffering is learn this stuff so you can calm down. So you could walk into their bedroom and say, oh my goodness, what a relief we were actually thinking about this. Maybe not wrong, but without all the tools in our toolkit. There's something else going on here and science backs it up. So this is not just me lecturing. I can show you where this is happening in the world. And this is such an amazing solution for us. It brings the nervous system into rest and repair just for that moment to even see that there's a solution.
I was at a book event you did last night in LA, which was amazing. And one of the things you talked about there was living in the present, that everything happens in the present. And I think in that very perfect example, what the unspoken is that what causes so much stress for us when our kid is school avoiding or is not avoiding, just can't get there, for instance, is we are starting to look down the road and think about all the consequences. And they're going to have to make up the test. And how are they going to get the notes? And, and we're there. We're living in the future. And one of the most powerful pieces of advice that I've heard you give many times on many different platforms is live in the present. It really makes a difference in terms of emptying that reservoir so it's not overflowing.
Yes, if it's not happening right now, it's not happening. And I agree, Cara, because I think what happens is we can't help our minds from going there, but we can center ourselves and not allow our behaviors with our kids to go there, because it will help not at all. If the kid is so stricken with whatever they're stricken with that they can't go to school, worrying about whether or not they're going to get the notes and fail the test, not going to help. But we can't help it unless we really understand how to bring ourselves into that moment, because I believe in living in the solution. And if you know that the shortest line between 2 points is living in the solution, not getting yourself caught up in that panic and making it worse, then you can kind of bring yourself back, pause, and do what needs to be done.
I can't stop thinking about my stomach aches in third grade going to a new school, and my gratitude to my mother, who somehow intuitively understood, because your work didn't exist, that it was about the emotional experience of being in a new school, and sort of gave me the space to, just ride it through with her love and support, and not, she took me to the doctor and it became clear it was not about all the other stuff that Cara talked about.
But it was very evolved. It was really evolved.
Yeah. My mom was very, very ahead of her time. She also really liked to talk about sex, like all the time.
Well, look where you ended up.
Shocking. I know. It's really, talk about the shortest line between here and there. Yes. That's a clear line. Nicole, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking on this really complex and really big and important topic that is very scary to a lot of people. And you do it with such grace and such humanity. And it's fascinating. I learned so much reading your book and again, talking to you here. And I know that people will find it really, really illuminating. Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.